2001. Kid A is one of my favourite albums ever. The vinyl is proudly displayed in my house. Radiohead, probably one of my favourite bands ever.
It's a really interesting shot, what they've done with that. Kind of looks like a broken glass or something. Sharded.
The fractured mind.
Fractured mind. Oh, is that what it says?
The taunted mind.
Where are you reading?
No, I'm not.
Oh, right. That's what you're inferring from it, yeah. Interesting that they've got Destiny's Child in this edition. Bob Dylan, Joey Ramone, Destiny's Child.
Stereo MCs.
Ah.
That is a nice, diverse mix of music on that front cover. Yeah, as I say, Kid A was just like, for me, that was a lesson in fortitude and fearlessness, you know, like to be able to do an album like that was, you know, so different from what had come before, and, you know, being so enthusiastic about experimentation and being so bold. Yeah, it was massive influence. Like, I went through a stage of learning like all of the piano-based songs, like just sat. That was probably the first thing I did when I got a piano. I didn't get a piano until 2 years ago, like an actual piano. You know, I just practiced on a MIDI keyboard, but and that was some of the first stuff I learned. I
just noticed Brian Eno is also on the front cover of this one. I'm a big fan of his. We're actually big fans of John Hopkins, and we didn't realise that we were doing an interview like years ago, and at the time we had never heard of, I don't think we had heard of Brian Eno. And the interviewer was like, oh, obviously you know Brian Eno. And we're like, well, no. And he's like, well, John Hopkins was like Brian Eno's sort of protege or something, you know, worked with him a hell of a lot. And so then that got us into a lot of Brian Eno back, you know, this was like 10 years ago or something.
Kiffen, Coxon, Southern. Right.
Okay.
Rock and roll. The archaic, fading
stereotype.
Yeah, that is rock and roll.
Yeah, well, certainly you don't have that many straight edge folks in the electronic scene. Like from my experience of going out and to nightclubs where you've got dance music, drum and bass, house, etc., etc. I didn't know many people that weren't at least drinking alcohol in it, whereas the sort of the punk hardcore scene has much bigger. The straight edge scene in punk and hardcore can often seem quite like you have to be that or you're nothing else. You know, they're very sort of strict with it.
We've never really like opted to fit in, you know, any musical sort of scene. I think it's the same with that. Like, we take influences from everywhere, so like we're not stringently against drugs, we're not stringently for drugs, like, you know, each to their own. Like, so it's such a boring answer.
Yeah, but like, do whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah,
like,
do what you.
As long as it's not like, to the point where it's destroying your life or hurting other people. If you're using it for a good time and it's not using you and, you know, just ruining you, then go out and have a good time. But it's a difficult subject. I certainly think that a lot more could be done instead of having strict policing on it and spending so much money on policing it and arresting people for it. It would be a lot more useful to put that money into perhaps education behind drugs, or making sure that the drugs that people are taking are clean, or putting money into sort of rehabilitation centres or things like that. Because I don't think arresting someone for doing drugs is going to stop them from doing drugs again in the future. It's not stopping the market for illegal drugs. And there are plenty of legal drugs that are just as destructive as the illegal ones, but for some reason they're accepted in society, and it's all a bit hypocritical in many ways. So I think in general we're quite liberal.
Oh yeah, like
absolutely.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, I think we were lumped in all sorts of scenes, to be honest. But like, I think people quickly realised that there was more to us than, you know, not to debase any of those scenes, but like our influences were broader. Like we were just lucky really to grow up around so many different musical inspirations, and therefore the music that we make couldn't sort of really fit in those, you know, very defined sort of scenes. But that's not to say that they were still an influence on us. It was still something that we were happy to sort of be involved in.
We played with them once.
My Chem, yeah.
With My Chem in, what was it, Hammersmith Palais
Yeah.
or Apollo? One of the two. Years and years ago.
It was the release show for, might have been Black Parade actually.
Yeah, I think it was.
But yeah, great time.
David Bowie.
Looking very pristine in his white get-up. 2015, God, it seems longer ago. Christ, he's an influence on everything really, I think. Especially anything sort of vaguely alternative. Again, same sort of thing I was saying about Radiohead. There was a boldness there, a fearlessness.
I especially love his last album, Black Star. It feels like, listening to it, it's like, you can almost tell that he knew he was going to die soon. So he was just fucking going out and making an album that he really wants to make, and like doesn't give a shit if it gets, you know, chart position or if people like it or not. It's just purely like his art piece for the sake of art, and it's such a joy to listen to, and so kind of weird, almost like psychedelic, but not like in a sort of 70s rock way. You can sort of close your eyes and feel like yourself drifting off with it, and the drumming in it is amazing. And I actually went on to see the drummer in a jazz club in London only a few weeks ago, but his name escapes my brain right now. I'm having one of those moments, but yeah. And Rou even has been playing a cover of Heroes on stage for a while now.
It was basically just from requests from the fan base, really. Like, so many people wanted it, like a proper recording of it. And I was already orchestrating the Dreamers Hotel, the acoustic version of that. We did it with a string quintet. Was there a woodwind? I can't remember. It might have been woodwind as well. And then, so yeah, just thought it would be a great chance to do that with Heroes as well.
Coldplay, we're also on here. We've been fans of their music for quite a long time.
They're one of my favourite bands. Like, it's probably the most surprising band for, like, a lot of people are just like, what? But yeah,
what?
Especially since they worked with like Eno and what's the guy you mentioned earlier? John Hopkins. Like that whole
Did they? I didn't know they
era.
worked with John Hopkins.
Yeah.
There you go. I've learned something new today.
Yeah.
Did you went and saw them? You went and saw them play a show in quite a small venue, and I remember you coming back and saying how impressed you were with their showmanship, going from like massive stadiums to this small. Where did you see, like Brixton or you know, it's like a
Camden, I think. Somewhere on the canal. I can't remember the venue. But I remember Chris Martin not knowing what to say.
Oh, really?
Feeling a bit like there was almost like an awkward. I mean, they were still brilliant and it was an amazing show, but it felt like, yeah, it felt strange seeing them in such a small place.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Huh. They're not just their music, but their sort of their stage productions are an obvious inspiration, because they always put so much behind their shows, and it's so impressive. And like when they did that thing with the wristbands or something that light up all across the stadium and sort of like create, you know, or make the audience part of the show. So that's innovations like that are really sort of exciting and pushing productions further, which we try to do as well, as much as possible within our means. Perhaps if we had Coldplay's budget and the size of rooms they do, then maybe we'd be putting on those kind of shows too. It's funny because when you say the word punk, so often, like to the lay person, you'd think of sort of someone that's pissed off with society and sort of shouting back. And there's almost like anger in the music because you're annoyed at the state of things. Whereas like so much of Blondie isn't that. But she was, she wasn't angry, but she was sort of wild and out there and careless. No, not careless, carefree. Yeah, because if I think of like the song, like Hanging on the Telephone, like that seems, okay, that's got a kind of keep me hanging, it's got a kind of punky like edge to it, the fast drum beat and stuff. But then you think of Heart of Glass, you know, that's sort of got this nice poppy, it's a nice pop song. So it's funny that she's considered a punk icon.
I suppose a lot of it as well was like where the people and the music was coming from, who was funding it, whether it was actually written by the artist, all of that kind of thing was like, you know, what also went into defining someone as punk or not. I think we've gone through every possible answer to that in our career. Like there was a stage where I was like, vehemently, we are punk. Like, punk is a mindset, you know, this kind of progressive way of thinking. And then just so many people within the punk scene who were also self-described as punk would like do things that pissed me off and that I didn't think was punk. So I was like, no, we're not punk. Like, fuck punk. Like, I remember, like, and even like early on, you know, we'd play with some bands who like dressed completely punk and played what you would say is the stereotype, like 1970s, 1980s punk. And like, for me, but they were arseholes. So for me, I was like, well, that's not very punk, you know.
It's fucking posers.
Yeah, that's bringing like the kind of neoliberal self-interest before anything else, bringing that into music. That's just not right. That's not punk. Yeah, and also like, is playing the same thing that was considered punk in the 1970s playing that now? Is that punk? I don't think so. I think punk is more of like a reaction to what's going on around you, a reaction full of frustration. So yeah, I started to consider that wasn't punk. So it's the problem is it's such like an undefined term that you can argue what it is and if you are it or if you aren't, you know, until the cows come home.